The boy hadn't spoken in 4 months. Not to the grief counselor who came every Tuesday with her soft voice and her folder of worksheets. Not to his teachers who had stopped calling on him by October and simply let him sit near the window where he could watch the oak tree lose its leaves. Not to his grandmother, who flew in from Atlanta and stayed for 3 weeks and cooked everything he used to love and cried quietly in the kitchen when she thought no one could hear. He hadn't spoken, and no one knew what to do about it. His name was Tobias. He was 9 years old. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw and a way of holding very still when the world got too loud that made the adults around him unsure whether he was coping or simply waiting for something they couldn't see. His father's name was Desmond Hale, 44 years old, founder of a logistics software company that had made him wealthy enough to employ a household staff of 6, wealthy enough to own a home with 12 rooms in it, wealthy enough, he had told himself, to give his son every possible advantage. He had not been wealthy enough to keep his wife alive. Her name had been Carla. She had died in March, a blood clot, fast and without warning, while Tobias was at school learning long division. Desmond had not known what to do with his grief, so he had put it somewhere small and tight inside his chest and continued running his company. He checked in with the counselors. He read the books. He kept the household running. He told himself that structure was the best thing he could give Tobias right now, and he believed it the way a man believes something he has chosen to believe, because the alternative is unbearable. It was his assistant, Margot, who suggested the after-school program at the community center on Birchwood Street. Tobias had liked art once. The program had an art component. It ran from 3 to 5 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Desmond agreed because he had run out of other things to agree to. What Margot did not mention, because she did not think it relevant, was that the program's lead coordinator had recently changed. The new coordinator had arrived in September, 6 weeks before Tobias. Her name was Imara Solis. She was 38 years old. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Baltimore with her mother and her aunt and a rotating cast of cousins. And she had put herself through school on grants and waitressing shifts and the kind of focused, quiet determination that people who have never been poor sometimes mistake for luck. She had a degree in social work and another in childhood development and 10 years of experience working with kids who had stopped talking for one reason or another. She was not famous. She drove a used Civic with a cracked side mirror. She wore her hair in 2-strand twists and kept a bag of clementines on her desk because she had noticed that kids who were hungry were less likely to make eye contact. She had taken the coordinator position because the previous one had burned out in July, and the center director, a round-faced man named Gerald, had called her personally and told her the program was 3 weeks from shutting down. She had not wanted to leave her previous job in Philadelphia. She had left anyway. This was the kind of thing Imara did. She was at the supply table, cutting paper into squares, when Tobias arrived for the first time. He came in slightly behind a woman who turned out to be his grandmother, who spoke to Gerald at the front desk, whilst Tobias stood very still just inside the door and looked at the room. Imara looked at him the way she looked at all the kids who came in for the first time. Not too long. Not searching. Just a glance that said, "I see you, and you don't have to do anything about that right now." She went back to cutting paper. Tobias found a seat at the far end of the table nearest the window. He did not pick up a pencil. He did not look at the paper in front of him. He watched the other kids for a while, and then he watched the window, and then he watched his own hands. Imara set a small cup of clementine segments near his elbow without comment. He didn't eat them, but 20 minutes later, when she glanced over, they were gone. Desmond came to pick Tobias up the second Thursday and arrived 15 minutes early because a meeting had ended faster than expected. He told the woman at the front desk he was there for his son, and she pointed him toward the main room, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before anyone noticed him. The room was busy. Kids at tables, papers and paint everywhere, someone's wet brush dripping onto the floor. And Tobias was at his usual spot by the window, But he wasn't watching the window this time. He was watching the woman at the supply table. She was describing something to a girl beside her, and whatever she was saying was making the girl laugh, and Tobias's face had gone very still, in a way Desmond had learned to read not as sadness but as close attention. His son was listening. Tobias had not listened to anyone in 4 months. Desmond did not announce himself. He stood in the doorway and he watched his son watch the woman, and he felt something shift inside his chest in a way he didn't entirely understand. The woman looked up eventually and saw him. She did not seem startled. She came over calmly and introduced herself as Amara, the program coordinator, and told him Tobias had been there for 2 sessions now and was doing well. "He doesn't speak," Desmond said. He said it the way he always said it to new people, as a fact, as a warning, as something that needed to be on the table before expectations formed. "I know," Amara said. "He communicates in other ways. He's been choosing blue every time." "That's not nothing." Desmond looked at her. "Blue? For the paper. We have a choice of colors. He always takes blue. Some kids don't have the energy to have preferences yet. Tobias does." She said it simply, without performance. "That's a good sign." Desmond didn't say anything. Amara went back to the supply table. On the way home, Desmond asked Tobias if he liked the program. Tobias looked out the car window. But after a moment he nodded. Once, small, almost imperceptible. Desmond gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and didn't say anything else. The weeks moved. October into November. The oak tree outside Tobias's classroom went bare. His grandmother went back to Atlanta. The counselor kept coming on Tuesdays with her folder. Tobias kept going to Birchwood Street on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He still didn't speak. But things were changing in the way that small things change. So slowly that you don't notice until you're looking back and realizing the distance traveled. He started picking up a pencil during the free draw sessions. He started finishing the clementines while they were still fresh instead of letting them sit. He started arriving at the room instead of stopping at the doorway. And he started watching Imara, not in a way that was unusual or unsettling, in the way that children watch adults who have made them feel safe, with a careful, tracking attention that is really just a form of trust being slowly extended. Imara noticed. She always noticed, but she did not make a point of it. She let him watch. She talked to the other kids in his vicinity. She left books on the table near his seat, wordless picture books at first, then ones with short captions, as if she were building a bridge one plank at a time and was in no particular hurry to reach the other side. One Thursday in November, she set a sketchbook next to his clementines. No explanation. Just the sketchbook. The next session it had been opened. Desmond was not a man who admitted to curiosity easily. He had built his company on decisive action, on knowing what he wanted and moving toward it without second-guessing. Curiosity, in his experience, was a luxury that cost time. But he found himself thinking about Imara Solis in the spaces between meetings. What she had said about preferences, about blue, about it not being nothing. He came early again the following Thursday, and then the Thursday after that. He told himself he was monitoring the program, making sure it was worth the investment of his son's time. He watched from the doorway. He watched Tobias. And he watched Imara. And he watched the way the room functioned when she was in it, which was differently than it would have. Without her, he thought, though he couldn't have explained exactly how. She moved through the space without urgency. She didn't raise her voice. She had a way of crouching down to a child's level when she spoke to them that was not condescending, but simply leveling, as if she was making a point of meeting them where they were. She laughed easily, a real laugh, not the managed warmth of someone performing care. He noticed that she was good at her job the way you notice something true. Without drama. On a Thursday in the second week of November, he arrived early enough that the session was still running, and he stayed near the door and watched Tobias sketch something in the sketchbook. He couldn't see what it was from where he stood. But Amara walked past Tobias's table and paused and looked at the page, and something changed in her face. Not surprise. Something quieter than that. She didn't say anything to Tobias. She just put her hand briefly on the corner of the sketchbook, a small acknowledgement, and moved on. Tobias kept drawing. Desmond stayed after the other parents had collected their kids. He waited until Tobias was getting his coat on near the door, and then he walked over to Amara, who was straightening the supply table. "Can I ask what he drew?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went to the table where Tobias had been sitting and turned the sketchbook so Desmond could see. It was a woman, dark hair, soft edges, sitting in what looked like a kitchen. There was a mug on the table in front of her, a window behind her with light coming through. It was rough in the way that a 9-year-old's drawing is rough, but it was careful. It was someone specific. Desmond looked at it for a long time. "His mother," he said. It was not a question. "I thought so," Amara said. "He's been working on it for 2 sessions." Desmond didn't trust himself to speak for a moment. He looked at the drawing and then at the window, and then at his shoes. Then he said, "He hasn't drawn anything since she died. He used to draw all the time. She used to save everything he made." Amara said, "He's saving this one too. He asked me if he could leave it here between sessions." Desmond looked at her. "He asked you?" She held his gaze. "He wrote it on a piece of paper and put it on my desk." Desmond pressed his lips together. He looked back at the drawing. Then he looked at Amara and said, "Thank you," and the word came out stripped of the professional distance he usually maintained. Just the 2 syllables, plain and real. She nodded. She didn't perform modesty about it. She just nodded, as if she understood what it cost him to say it, and was receiving it simply. He picked up Tobias. He drove home. He sat in the car, in the driveway for 4 minutes after Tobias went inside and did not move. He started volunteering at the center in December. He told himself it was about visibility, about Tobias seeing his father engaged in the community. He told Gerald he had some evening hours free and asked if there was anything useful he could do. Gerald, who was chronically short on help, put him on general maintenance and supply runs. He did not tell Amara that Tobias was his son. It was not a deliberate deception at first. He simply hadn't thought to announce it. He came in, he helped where he was needed, he stayed out of the way. He wore old clothes. He fixed a cabinet hinge in the storage room and helped move tables and drove to the supply store on Kedzie Avenue twice. Amara said hello to him the way she said hello to everyone, straightforwardly, and then went back to what she was doing. He watched her work. She was in the middle of writing a grant proposal. He learned from Gerald to keep the after-school program funded through the following year. The center's main funding source had decreased their allocation in September. The program was running on what Gerald called a wing and several prayers. Amara was writing the proposal on her lunch breaks and her evenings after the kids went home, Gerald said, and had already submitted 2 smaller grants and was waiting on both. Desmond filed this away. On a Wednesday afternoon in mid-December, he was moving some folding chairs to the storage room when Amara came in to get paper towels. She acknowledged him, and then she paused and said, "You've been here a lot." Gerald needed the help, Desmond said. She studied him for a moment, not suspiciously, but with attention. "What do you do?" she asked. "Normally, tech," he said. "Software. That's a long way from folding chairs." "It is," he said. She took her paper towels and left. He stood in the storage room for a moment and thought about what he was doing. He wasn't entirely sure. Tobias spoke for the first time on a Thursday in the 3rd week of December. Desmond wasn't there. He heard about it from his son, which was itself the news. He came to pick Tobias up and found him at his usual table, but with something different in his posture. A looseness. A slight upward angle to his chin. Amara was at the supply table with her back to the door and did not see Desmond arrive. Tobias looked up when his father came in, and then he looked at Desmond and said, "She told me about the blue?" Desmond stopped walking. He stood, very still. He said carefully, "What did she say?" "She said when she was little, blue was the color she picked when she needed things to feel calm. She said some feelings are too big for words, so we put them somewhere else." Tobias looked at his hands. "She said drawing was how I was talking." Desmond sat down in the chair next to his son. He did this slowly, as if he was afraid of startling something. "Did that make sense to you?" he asked. Tobias looked at the sketchbook. She said Mom could see it. The drawing. She said people we love can always find us when we make something. Desmond looked at his son, at the jaw that was Desmond's own jaw, at the eyes that were Carla's eyes, at 9 years of living in a body that was still figuring out how to carry loss. Do you believe that? Desmond asked. Tobias thought about it. Really thought, the way he used to think before everything went quiet. Then, he said, I think so. Desmond put his hand on the back of his son's neck, lightly, and Tobias didn't pull away. From across the room, at the supply table, Amara was writing something and not looking at them. But her pen had slowed, and in the particular stillness of the room at the end of the day, with the light going gray outside the window and the last of the other kids filtering out, it was possible to sense that she had heard. Desmond came back the next morning without Tobias. He asked for Gerald, and Gerald brought him into the small office near the back, and Desmond sat down across the desk and told him who he was, his full name, what his company was, what he wanted to do. Gerald was quiet for a moment, then he said, Amara's going to want to know why. I know, Desmond said. I'll tell her myself. He found her in the main room setting up for the morning's session. She was arranging paper at the tables with her back to the door, and he said her name and she turned. She knew before he finished the sentence. He could see it in her face, the way the pieces landed and connected. She set down the stack of paper in her hands. Tobias is your son, she said. A silence. Outside in the hallway, a door opened and closed. How long have you been coming in here? She said. 3 weeks. She looked at him steadily. And you didn't say anything. I didn't know how to say it, he said. At first. And then I didn't know how to explain why I hadn't said it. And then I kept coming because... He stopped. Because being here made sense in a way that not many things have this year. She looked at him for a long moment. He held it, didn't look away. That's not nothing. He recognized his own words, the ones she had used on him weeks ago in the parking lot. The way she returned them now was not calculated. It was simple. A thread pulled through. I want to fund the program, he said. Full operating costs for 3 years. And the facility upgrades Gerald told me about. I'll have my attorney draw up an agreement with no strings. She crossed her arms. No strings. Gerald controls it. You run the program. I write the check, she said. Why? He thought about Tobias at the table with the sketchbook. About the drawing of Carla in the kitchen, with the light coming through the window. About 4 months of silence ending in a sentence. Because my son started talking again in this room, he said, and I think that's worth protecting. She was quiet. She looked at the tables she'd been setting up, at the stacks of paper and the cups of colored pencils, and the small cup on the far table that still held a few dried clementine peels from the day before. Okay, she said. Okay. He did not ask her to dinner that day, or that week, or that month. He came back to the center in January, not as a volunteer, but as someone who was building a formal relationship with the organization, attending board meetings, working with Gerald on a multi-year plan. He saw Amara in that context. He was professional. He maintained the appropriate distance. But he noticed that she noticed when he came in. He noticed that she said his name differently than she said other people's names. A slight change in register. Something attentive. He noticed that Tobias, who had started speaking in short sentences, and then longer ones, and then, by February, in full paragraphs, would sometimes look between his father and Amara when they were in the same room with an expression Desmond recognized as something between hope and calculation. He waited. In March, on the 1-year anniversary of Carla's death, he took Tobias to the place she had loved most, a small botanical garden on the north side of the city where she used to take Tobias on Saturday mornings when he was small. They walked through it slowly. Tobias had brought his sketchbook. He stopped at a particular bench near the rose beds that they both recognized without naming it, and he sat down and opened to a clean page and drew. Desmond sat beside him and watched the winter roses and said nothing for a long time. Then Tobias said, without looking up from his page, "Do you like Amara?" Desmond said, "Yes, like her? Tobias, Dad." Desmond looked at the roses. "I don't know yet," he said, which was not entirely true but was the truest thing he could say, in a way that was fair to all three of them. Tobias drew something on his page. Then he said, "She talks about you sometimes, when you're not there." Desmond looked at his son. "What does she say?" "That you're different than she expected." "Different how?" Tobias shrugged, the specific shrug of a 10-year-old withholding information for leverage. "Good different, I think." He turned the sketchbook slightly so Desmond couldn't see the page. "You should ask her." Desmond looked at the roses for another long moment. The morning light was cold and pale and clear, and the garden was almost empty, and somewhere behind them, a groundskeeper was raking leaves along the stone path with a sound that was very distant and very ordinary. "I will," Desmond said, "when I know what to say." He knew what to say in April. He came to the center on a Thursday evening after the program had ended and the kids had gone home, and he found Amara in the main room finishing the kind of small tasks that never made it onto any official list, wiping down tables, collecting stray pencils, pushing chairs back into their places. The room smelled like paper and dried paint and the faint sweetness of citrus peel. He stood in the doorway until she saw him. "We're closed," she said, and there was a warmth underneath the dry humor of it. "I know," he said. "I came to tell you something." She set down the cloth she'd been using. She waited. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. "Not as a donor, not in any professional capacity. As someone who has been thinking about you since October, and has been trying to figure out the right time to say so, and has finally accepted that there isn't a right time, there's just the time that is." She was quiet. He held the quiet. Then she said, "You waited a long time." "I wanted to be sure," he said, "about what I was feeling. About whether it was the situation, or whether it was you." "And it's you," he said simply. "It's been you for a while." She looked at him with the same level attention she used for everything, for grant proposals and sad children and stray pencils. She was not a woman who arrived at decisions quickly when the decisions mattered. "Okay," she said finally, the same word she had used in the fall when he'd offered to fund the program. Quiet and direct and carrying more than it showed. "Saturday?" he said. "Saturday," she agreed. She picked up her cloth and went back to wiping the table, and he stood in the doorway for another moment, and the evening light came through the windows at the low slant of April, long and golden, and landed across the tables where the kids had been sitting all afternoon, across the cups of colored pencils and the clean paper and the small stack of sketchbooks on the shelf by the window. Tobias's was the one on the left. The spine was worn from use. Inside it were 36 drawings now, most of them small studies of ordinary things. A mug, a branch, a pair of hands, a window with light coming through. And in the middle of the sketchbook, on a page that had been worked and reworked until the paper was slightly soft from all the attention, was the drawing of his mother in the kitchen. Carla was sitting at the table. The mug was in front of her. The light was coming through the window. She was looking just slightly off to the side, not at the viewer, as if she had heard something in the next room and was about to turn, as if she was still listening for them, as if she was still there.